Hi, are you ready for a new book? I have the Magic Treehouse, book number 13, Vacation Under the Volcano. Here's the cover. Get comfy. Chapter 1, A Secret Code. Jack reached into his drawer and took out his secret library card. He held the thin piece of wood and ran his finger over its shimmering letters. Master Librarian, he whispered. Jack couldn't believe that he and his sister Annie were finally master librarians. He wondered if he should pack the card to take on vacation. His family was about to leave for a week in the mountains. Just then, Annie stuck her head into Jack's room. "Want to check the woods?" she asked. Every morning they looked in the Frog Creek woods to see if Morgan Le Fay and her magic treehouse had returned. "We can't," said Jack. "We're leaving soon." "But what if Morgan's there?" asked Annie. "What if she's waiting for us?" Okay, said Jack. "Let's look fast." He grabbed his backpack. He threw his notebook, his pencil, and his library card inside. Then he followed Annie downstairs. "We'll be back soon," Annie called. "Don't go far," their dad called. "We're leaving in 20 minutes. "Don't worry, we'll be back in 10, said Annie. Right, thought Jack. 5 minutes in the woods and 5 minutes back. Even if Morgan sent them on an adventure, they would return at exactly the same time that they had left. Jack and Annie ran out their front door. In the bright morning sunshine, they hurried across their lawn and down the street. "I had a nightmare last night," said Annie. "What was it?" asked Jack. "I dreamed fires were burning," said Annie. "Everything was smoky and dark, and the ground was shaking. Do you think it was a warning?" "Nah," said Jack. "Nightmares never come true." They left the sidewalk and headed into the Frog Creek woods. The woods were quiet and peaceful. They walked between sunlit trees until they came to the tallest oak tree in the woods. "Yay," said Annie. There it was, the magic tree house, and Morgan Le Fay was waving from the window. "Hail, Master Librarian," she said. Jack and Annie bowed playfully. "At your service," said Annie. "Then come on up," said Morgan. They grabbed the rope ladder and started up. When they climbed inside the treehouse, they found Morgan holding a book and a piece of paper. "I have an important mission for you," she said. "Are you ready?" "Yes," they both answered. Jack's heart pounded. Ever since Morgan had made them master librarians, he had been longing for their first mission. "You know I collect books for Camelot's library," she said. Jack and Annie nodded. "Well, there have been many great libraries lost in history," said Morgan, "and with them we have lost many wonderful stories." "That's sad," said Annie. "It is," said Morgan, "but luckily with the help of the treehouse and you two master librarians, some of these stories can be saved, such as this one." Morgan showed them a piece of paper. There was strange writing on it. "Vir fortissimus in mundo." "Is that a secret code?" said Jack. Morgan smiled. "In a way," she said. "Actually, it's the title of a lost story. It's written in Latin, the language of the ancient Romans in Italy." "Ancient Romans?" said Jack. He loved anything to do with ancient Romans. "Yes," said Morgan. "The story was in a library in a Roman town. I need you to get it before the library becomes lost forever." "No problem," said Annie. "Do you have your library cards?" asked Morgan. "Yes," said Jack. "Good. Do not lose them. The right people will know what they mean," said Morgan. "And, as usual, here is the book to help you." Morgan handed Jack a book called Life in Roman Times. The cover showed a Roman town with people wearing tunics and sandals. "That looks great," said Jack. "And take this. The name of the story I need," said Morgan. She handed the piece of paper to Jack, and he put it in his pack. "Remember," said Morgan, "your research book will guide you. But remember this. In your darkest hour, Only the ancient story can save you. But first, you must find it. Jack and Annie nodded. Go now, said Morgan, and don't forget what I just told you. Thanks, said Jack. He pointed at the cover of the book on Roman times. I wish we could go there, he said. The wind started to blow. I almost forgot. I'm going to help you blend in, Morgan shouted above the wind. What do you mean? Shouted Jack. Before Morgan could answer, the treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster. Then everything was still. Absolutely still. Oh, cool, whispered Annie. Look at us. Chapter 2. The end is near. Jack opened his eyes. He pushed his glasses into place. Morgan was gone, and so were Jack's jeans, t-shirt, sneakers, and backpack. Instead, he had on a white tunic with a belt, sandals that laced up, and a leather bag. He looked at Annie. She was dressed the same way. Morgan had made them look just like kids in an ancient Roman town. I guess this is what Morgan meant, said Jack, when she said she'd help us blend in. I feel like Cinderella, said Annie. I like these clothes. Let's go back to the cover and see what they're wearing. See their tunics and their sandals, so they blend in. Yeah, said Jack, although he felt as if he were wearing a dress. Annie looked out the window. It's pretty here, she said. Jack looked with her. They had landed in a grove of trees. On one side of the grove rose a gentle-looking mountain. On the other, a town sparkled in the sunlight. I wonder where we are, said Jack. He opened to the book about Roman times. He read aloud. Almost 2,000 years ago, on August 24th, A.D. 79, the seaside town of Pompeii was a typical Roman town. Many Romans went there on their vacation. They built large houses called villas and planted groves of olive trees along the slopes of a mountain called Mount Vesuvius. Annie kept looking out the window as Jack pulled out his notebook and pencil. He wrote, Vacation in Pompeii, August 24th, A.D. 79, houses called villas. Jack looked out the window again. It does look like a nice place to go on vacation, he said. We must have landed in one of the olive groves, said Annie. Yeah, and that town must be Pompeii, said Jack. He looked in the opposite direction. And that mountain must be Mount Vesuvius. Annie shivered. That name sounds scary, she said. Really, said Jack. Not to me. He looked down at his notes. Hey, did you feel that? Said Annie. What? Jack looked up. The ground shook. I heard it rumble too, said Annie. Jack frowned. I think you were just dreaming again, he said. No, I wasn't, said Annie. Something feels wrong about this place. I really think we should go home now. Are you nuts? Said Jack. We have to find that lost story from Morgan. Besides, I've always wanted to see a Roman town. He threw his notebook and the Roman book into his leather bag. Then he went down the rope ladder. Come on, he called when he stepped onto the ground. Annie just stared down at him. Don't be chicken, he said. He pushed his glasses into place. Come on, it'll be fun. Annie still didn't move. What's wrong with her? Jack wondered. Usually I'm the worried one. Come on, he pleaded. We can't let Morgan down. Annie let out a big sigh. Okay, we'd better find that story fast, she said. Finally, she climbed down the rope ladder. The sun was bright and hot as they took off between the olive trees. With Mount Vesuvius at their backs, they headed for the town of Pompeii. That's weird, said Annie. I don't hear any birds. She was right. The grove was strangely silent. Don't worry about it, said Jack. Maybe they're all at the beach. Come on, let's go over that bridge. He led the way to a small wooden bridge that crossed a narrow stream. But when they got to the stream, they found it had dried up. That's really weird, said Annie. Don't worry, said Jack. It just means there hasn't been much rain. They crossed the bridge and stepped onto a busy street. It was paved with stone. People were buying things in open shops that lined the streets. Some looked rushed and busy. Others moved slowly. Kids walked with their parents. Groups of teenagers talked and laughed. They don't seem very different from people shopping in Frog Creek, Jack thought. Except for the clothes, of course. How will we ever find the ancient lost library? Said Annie, glancing around. I don't know, said Jack. Just be on the lookout. They walked past shops that had huge jars in them. When Jack looked closely, he saw that they were filled with grain, dried fruit, and olives. Meat hung from the ceilings of some of the stores. They passed a noisy tavern where people were eating and drinking. A young man played a stringed instrument. See, there's nothing to worry about, said Jack. This place isn't all that different from our time. It's not that, said Annie with a worried look. See, there's a barber shop and a shoe shop, said Jack, pointing. A boy was getting his hair cut by a barber. A girl was trying on a new pair of sandals with her mother. It's kind of like we're home, Annie agreed. They kept walking until they passed a bakery filled with freshly baked flatbreads. That bread is like pizza, said Annie, smiling. Yeah, said Jack. The good smells from the bakery made him feel even more at home. Jack looked at Annie. She was still smiling as they walked on. Soon they came to a large square filled with people, carts, and horses, and more shopping stalls. Honey cakes, stuffed dates, peacock eggs, sellers called. Farmers were selling grapes, garlic, and onions. Fishermen were selling all kinds of fish. A few people stood on boxes, giving speeches to small crowds. Hey, I bet this is a forum, said Jack. He reached in his bag for his book. He flipped through it until he found a picture of the square. He read, "The center of a Roman town was called a forum. The forum was the main place where people met to sell goods and discuss politics." I was right, said Jack. He pulled out his notebook. He wrote, "Forum equals center of town." Jack, whispered Annie. Jack! She tugged on his tunic. Look. Jack glanced up. Annie nodded toward an old woman who was staring straight at them. She wore a black cloak. Her gray hair was tangled and wild. She seemed to be missing her teeth. The woman pointed a bony finger at Jack and Annie. "The end is near," she said in a raspy voice. "Go home, strangers." "Yikes," said Annie. "We'd better get away from her," said Jack, "before people wonder who we are." He put away his notebook. Then he and Annie hurried away. The old woman cackled behind them. That's the end of chapter 2. That was a long chapter. Next, we'll read chapters 3 and 4. Chapter 3 is called Gladiators. Rest has begun.